What's up, people? How y'all doing? I just wanted to share a paper that I wrote on some classical arguments whether or not God exists. So I'm just going to share it with you. I'll read it to you real quick. The cosmological argument. The universe must have come from somewhere, because everything in nature seems to come into existence from something else in nature. Science suggests that perhaps all matter was condensed into a single particle, which exploded and set everything into motion and expansion. When you consider that particles are made of mostly empty space, if you pack them all down into stuff, you can take all the particles of Earth and pack it down into a golf ball, maybe something smaller. That's pretty fascinating. And then subparticles. Anyways, this leads to the question, what came before the Big Bang? This is where some and many theists would bring God or a creator into the equation. And some would point out that if you go with this theory, it defeats the premise that everything that exists in nature comes from something else that exists in nature. If God exists, then he must have come from something or somewhere. So someone would suggest the idea that God is eternal and would make him superior to nature or supernatural. Supposing God is eternal, he could potentially create finite things, or a universe with a beginning and a potential end to everything inside it, yet not subject to it. If this was the case, then we would have to abandon the belief that everything comes from somewhere and place God in his own eternal realm outside of natural laws, essentially. So that's the cosmological argument. That's just something I kind of wrote up on it. And secondly, you have the ontological argument. This is what I wrote about this. Because we are capable of creating in our own mind a definition of a being, that nothing greater can be conceived, or perfect, flawless being, in a sense. Perhaps this could exist in our reality merely because it is conceivable, and existence would be a characteristic of this being. Using this logic, it seems anyone could idealize or create any particular perfect being and manifest them into existence. I mean, it presents kind of some problems. That argument's a little bit unclear, but however, some would suggest the idea of a perfection is essentially only to God, a being that is superior to all others and in a class of his own. Everything else would fall short, right? So I believe these ideas, or beings that people can conjure up, may not physically manifest, but they can influence our reality, i.e. superheroes and tooth fairies and such. Wars are fought over ideas, so it can be extremely real in a sense. Another argument, it would be the argument of design. You can use like an analogy that you're walking through chaos or a jungle, and you stumble into a place that's been sufficiently gardened and designed. Or let's just say you looked into nature closely and you notice that inside of the chaos there's order, like inside of the plants and inside of the flowers you see these patterns that come out, geometry and stuff like that. So there has to be some kind of intelligent design to it. I like to think that there's definitely some intelligent design when it comes to the geometry and the way things move and the way things flow and the way things grow. even the way the celestial bodies move, there's geometry in that and everything. So there's definitely design. So when we first look into nature, one might see chaos, but when you look a little closer, it's conclusive that there's order amongst the chaos. Science continues to search for those patterns, revealing the design of perhaps an intelligent being or a gardener to everything. And some point out that there seems to be evidence that the universe is growing less orderly because of entropy. You can look at it perhaps if the universe was more orderly in its early stages and is slowly giving into entropy from the Big Bang outwards. I mean, we can only assume based on particular observance of the universe. If it seems to be expanding, I think that's where they get that idea from this particular moment in linear time. So is it just an anomaly, or is that part of the random order that occurs out of chaos periodically? Or perhaps the creator would not be needed just time and consequential occurrences for it to be disrupted. Does that make any sense to you? Then there's a problem with suffering. Supposing God was an omnipotent or benevolent or perfect ideal being, the characteristics that would draw people to worship him, how could he let so many suffer in the world? If God is what is conceived to be, he could choose to end the suffering and would want to do so. Since it's evident suffering continues, God cannot be the God we have conceived if that's him. Factoring in free will could support some accounts of suffering, and from this we have a chance to experience life and set into motion actions, consequences, and repercussions that affect the world around us. Some would suggest this would give us a chance to reflect on things and adapt morally and spiritually. Don't smoke. It's bad for you. Sometimes suffering occurs without witness, or strikes someone down without stirring some moral objective in anyone. So the question is why, it's not always for a chance to reflect and morally grow. I mean, sometimes things happen to people and no one has a chance to learn from it, I consider God present in everything, experiencing the finite, so any conscious being experiencing anything is returning that experience to the source, no matter how brief, insignificant, or tragic it may be. So it's possible. Another question: does God exist as the problem with is the other minds? Each person in this sense is experiencing their own consciousness, so how can we be sure that others are experiencing the same thing, right? We may be able to observe others' actions and behaviors and deduce that they behave similar to us, but we can never really truly get inside people's heads, it's not real possible to understand their mentality. We must make a reasonable assumption that they think like us because they act like us. The same can be considered when observing the actions and behaviors of nature. With the trained mind, upon close inspection, you'll find fundamental patterns and designs. One could make a reasonable assumption that it is evidence of conscious creativity or a creator. Some would suggest it's not rational to attribute consciousness to nature or a tree because it does not act like him. And nature, unlike people, did not have a voice as evidence of consciousness. However, you can point out that the mathematics seem to be the voice of nature, and I'd have to agree. I believe a voice is just a characteristic, and upon inspection we would find similar characteristics between humans and nature in the voice of mathematics. Right? And the human must mentally develop his voice to express himself consciously. Likewise, develop a understanding of mathematics to hear the voice of nature. So in either case, it takes a trained mind to find expression in things, or to voice an expression about things. So, I don't know. Still didn't really answer the question, does God exist? But those are just some of the classical arguments I wanted to talk about. If that makes sense to any of you guys. Anyways, have a wonderful evening. God bless.